aims to electrify all buildings and have them be powered by renewable energy with the help of our community choice aggregation programs. And I really appreciate you all for having me here for your 8th annual environmental stewardship program. I'm excited to be here and excited to see the lineups of speakers. Rob and Tom have a lot of expertise. So I'm going to start with kind of like a little bit of a primer, so please bear with me. I'm not sure kind of where everyone is in terms of their knowledge of electrification. So got it. So as some of you already know, there is a movement underway to electrify all of our buildings, and there are a lot of cities and counties in California that have passed policies to support all electric building electrification and create a gas-free future for our homes. So this campaign is motivated by the climate crisis, worsening air pollution, heat waves, escalating gas prices, and the safety risks from gas appliances. So quick primer, this is just a glance and kind of like an oversimplification of what building electrification looks like. So this pie chart here shows the different appliances that we use in our homes and the greenhouse gas emissions that they're responsible for. So as you can see, space and water heating are responsible for the bulk of the climate change causing greenhouse gases when we burn gas using them. And stoves are a much smaller percentage of the pie of greenhouse gas emissions, but they still release harmful chemicals into our home that can cause negative health impacts. And so all electric appliances like heat pumps and induction stoves can be able to eliminate these sources of emissions and indoor air pollution. So what is a heat pump? A heat pump is a technology that is able to move heat from one location to another instead of generating it. So it is 3 to 5 times more efficient than the conventional water heater. And with a heat pump, you can get heating and cooling ability in one appliance, which allows you to save money. And your refrigerator is kind of like an example of what a heat pump does. So it can pull the hot air out, so it keeps the refrigerator inside cool. And if you stand around the refrigerator, so you'll feel that hot air being pulled onto the outside. So as I've shared before, transitioning homes to electric heat pumps can really be a way to tackle our greenhouse gas pollution. It can also improve air quality, support the state in meeting federal air quality standards, and typically the people of color in the US are exposed to nearly twice as much residential gas appliance pollution as white communities. And at a household level, there are many factors that contribute to this, to these higher levels of pollutants inside lower income homes. And this includes things like smaller unit size, more residents per home, inadequate ventilation, and things like improper use of a gas stove or oven, like for a source of heat. And so these factors, compounded by like already existing disparities in asthma burden and other health conditions, really put this subset of our community at a higher risk of negative health outcomes. So when we electrify our buildings, we really have to prioritize low-income households. We have to focus on the health impacts. We have to focus on community resiliency, improved housing, and lowering our energy bills. So these are just some of the things on the screen to watch out for when we are working on this campaign. We have to make sure there's no displacement, there's no increased rent, the cost of stranded gas assets aren't falling on those who can least afford it, and we're not locking in communities into dangerous gas as those who have the means are making the transition. So just a little bit more of a primer, and then we'll move on to like the meat of the presentation. So as you all have already heard, this is showing the that statewide homes and buildings in California generate 4 times more nitrogen oxide pollution than California's gas power plants, and more NOx than the region's passenger cars. So electrifying our homes and our appliances can really have a huge impact. All right, so here's the meat of the presentation that I feel like a lot of folks are really interested in, and just what has been happening lately. So as you all may have already heard, we recently had a slight setback in the building decarbonization movement. The federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals actually issued a decision in the legal challenge that was brought on by the California Restaurant Association. Unfortunately, the panel of judges found that Berkeley's gas ban ordinance is preempted by Federal Energy Policy Conservation Act. So EPCA is a term, if you're in this space, you'll be hearing a lot. So that's Energy Policy Conservation Act. And so despite the ruling, Berkeley's ordinance still remains in effect. The Ninth Circuit ruling is not final. The litigation challenging the ordinance is still developing, and there currently has been no injunction on the ordinance that has been issued. So at this moment, Berkeley has applied for an extension to file a petition based on this decision, and the petition is due at the end of this month on May 31st. So once Berkeley files the petition to appeal the decision, we'll have to wait for the judges to decide whether or not to take up this petition. So in the meantime, gas ban ordinances still remain in effect. So we want to make sure folks are still continuing to build on the momentum of this campaign, and don't let this slight setback stop us from continuing the good work that we're doing. We really believe that this was a bad ruling, and their ruling applies to an overbroad definition of federal preemption that really threatens the authority of local governments to be able to protect public health and the safety of their residents. In addition to this, this ruling was actually issued by 3 Republican judges that were appointed by Trump and Reagan, and one of them who actually worked for Exxon for many, many years. And the panel of judges really applied an extremely broad definition of EPCA, Energy Policy and Conservation Act preemption, without any guardrails for this interpretation. And on top of that, we also know that this lawsuit was backed by fossil fuel money and money from SoCalGas. So yeah, we believe that this ruling really doesn't have many legs to stand on. So we're really hopeful for what will happen from Berkeley. So currently there's approximately 25 cities in California that followed the Berkeley gas ban approach. And fortunately, many other cities have actually enacted building electrification policies through building codes instead of municipal codes. And these will not be impacted by the decision. Berkeley actually passed both a REACH code and a gas ban. So you can see that on the slide. The 2 side-by-side ordinances that Berkeley passed. And so the gas ban ordinance would use police powers, whereas the REACH code for electrification uses a building code standard, and it allows energy efficiency requirements beyond what the energy code is requiring. And it still allows for gas, like mixed fuel use. So this is another slide that kind of goes into that a little bit more. So what we're hoping for is that we can continue to push cities to go use the building code route, so the REACH code route, instead of the natural gas ban, as this appeal is being worked on. this is being petitioned. Here's just some more slides that kind of go into more detail. I think that, so there's a really good PowerPoint if folks want to get a better sense of kind of the differences between understanding what a gas ban is and the like municipal code ordinances and then also building code ordinances. So this here on the slide shows a natural gas moratorium. So this is a municipal ordinance. It uses the city's police powers to prohibit gas use. Why cities chose to do this route, from my understanding, is because it is the longest lasting, and it did not require a cost-effective study, and it doesn't require constant approval by the CEC. There's also the electric preferred option that uses the energy reach code that's tied to Title 24, Part 6 or Part 11. And then there's similarly the all electric ordinance that's also tied to Title 24, Part 6 or Part 11. So we're really hoping that we can push more cities to simultaneously pass reach codes as well. So while there has been a slight setback, with the help of many people in this meeting, Bay Area air regulators actually voted to approve the nation's first zero NOx standards for furnaces and water heaters, which will effectively phase out the sale of new gas furnaces and water heaters beginning later this decade. And the standard will only apply when a consumer would already be replacing a burned out ordinance. So it would not require anyone to remove working appliances. And this is really a historical moment for clean air and for the Bay Area and beyond. So thank you all in this room for those that took part in this. It was a really, really great victory that we had. So just a little bit more about this ruling. It's not, these rules from the air districts and the local Bay Area air quality management districts aren't anything new. Air districts have been regulating appliance standards for decades, but what is new is the push for zero NOx emitting appliances. And here are some of the findings from the air districts that show that these rules that pass will improve overall regional air quality from outdoor venting of these appliances, will prevent up to 85 premature deaths per year, and will lower PM 2.5 exposures, particular to communities of color, and it will avoid up to $890 million per year in health impacts due to air pollution exposure. So long-term health impacts from NOx and PM 2.5 include coughing, wheezing, asthma, and other respiratory conditions. So yeah, that was a really exciting victory. And I think we need to continue building on these the little victories that we have. I think the next step is also making sure that other air districts like South Coast Air District pass similar rules. And on another positive note, there's also the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which is really exciting. And it includes many programs that can help individuals save money while reducing pollution. And the IRA really includes more than 100 programs that will invest about $370 billion in climate action, clean energy jobs, and energy justice. And collectively, these unprecedented investments will really put us on the path to cutting climate pollution by 40% by 2030, and also create over 9 million family-sustaining jobs over the next decade, while we advance racial, economic, and environmental justice. So there's a lot of opportunities with the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's kind of one of the things that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later, about like these being actions and opportunities that individuals can take. And so you can go to our website, sierraclub.org/harnessing power Inflation Reduction Act, to find out more about ways that you can take advantage of this. So here are just a few more listed ways that individuals can get involved and not let the Berkeley decision kind of stop us from continuing to build on this momentum. Other actions that you can take, we can call on the EPA to reduce pollution from household appliances. So we want to list residential and commercial heating appliances as a regulatory source category subject to regulation under the Clean Air Act. So we really want to, there's a petition on our website that will call on the EPA to set these standards. So that's just one thing that we can do. And then at the Department of the Environment, we can call on them to electrify our federal buildings, to finalize a rule that reduces fossil fuel generated energy consumption in new and majorly renovated federal buildings. Currently, right now, the Department of Energy is actually 15 years behind in schedule in finalizing such a rule. So we really need to push them on that. The other option is to draft equitable home electrification roadmaps. There are cities that have already done so, like the city of Berkeley, the city of Alameda. I believe the city of San Jose has done one as well. We have resources for this to help with cities drafting plans like this. And I know Contra Costa County at the moment is drafting their plan as well. So it would be great if more and more cities can take this step and identify what that looks like what, and start having, doing a lot more education and outreach, and having community meetings within each city to start having these discussions. The next thing that folks can do is to organize Inflation Reduction Act workshops. There's currently already 2 that's happening. I don't know if this first one's as relevant. The first one is it's a conference organized by a few different organizations, I think mainly 350, that is going to hold a conference to talk about how the county is going to really take advantage of all this money that's coming down. There's going to be city staff, there's going to be nonprofits, there's going to be many different labor, there's going to be many different advocates. So I think it's worthwhile for different counties to similarly figure out kind of how to take advantage of this money. And then the second link is a workshop that's organized by the Sierra Club. It's on May 10th it's on May 10th. And it's kind of a workshop to learn more about how we can ensure that the federal climate investments really lead to real benefits for everyday people. And that's a Sierra Club organized workshop. And after the workshop and orientation, you'll be invited to kind of a host of different events in June, where you can gather your friends and family and neighbors and anyone who's interested in advocating for your community for the IRA, and to really begin to strategize and figure out how we can harness these federal climate investments in our own communities. And finally, working with CCAs to support electrification. From what I understand, there is actually a new coalition of CCAs working on marketing electrification. And when I find out more, I can share more, but I think that that's also a really exciting development. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I want to finish off by saying that we are moving in the right direction. For the first time this year, heat pump shipments have actually outpaced gas furnace shipments every month to date. And most recently, the federal data shows that electricity has actually surpassed gas usage as a leading fuel for heating. So that's really exciting. And then we also recently had the first in the nation to phase out subsidies for connecting new homes to the gas system. So we're moving in the right direction. I think we have to continue moving forward with the different ways to get involved, different ways to harness the IRA. So let's not let this small setback from the Berkeley decision hold us back. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to presentations from Tom and also Rob will dive in deeper. And with that, I'll pass it back to Gladwyn.
Thank you, Melissa. And these presentations will be available on our website after this session of ESP is completed. Our next speaker is Tom Kabat, and Tom will be speaking about easy electrification of homes. Tom. Tom, go ahead and share your screen.
Tom, I think you're still on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. My focus is on how to make electrification easy by doing it right so that you don't have to upsize the electric panel. Got a slight lag in my slide advancing, so I'll get used to that, I think. Okay, so thanks, Melissa, for going over those basics of what is electrification and heat pumps. And then one last thing, I talk a lot about watts and amps, these different electrical measurements, but basically watts are proportional to amps. Electricians worry about the amps. They're trying to keep the wires cool by keeping the flow of capacity down in the wires. And basically the flow is proportional to the watts of the device. We energy nerds look at watts, which are in power, and we tend to focus on those nameplates and save energy by picking better equipment. And it turns out when you pick this better, more efficient, right-sized equipment, you can also save the watts. And so what do I want? I basically don't want watts or volts or therms or any of that stuff because it all tastes bad or hurts. And so the things I really want are my end use needs met. So I want hot showers and cold beer. I want a good cooking experience. I want thermal comfort, those kind of things. So the smart strategy is to really use the equipment that meets my needs and then use the efficient models of that equipment and make it right-sized instead of oversized. And then if needed, use controls on it. There are different retrofit controls that can help the devices take turns so they're not all on at once, or so they're on in the right part of the day to soak up all that excess solar power. And then we can also insulate well and get around to it when we get around to it. But when you get the opportunity to electrify, you should jump on that opportunity and not put other things ahead of it. And so I use a slang term, the watt diet, to refer to this kind of Amory Lovins type of electric efficiency optimization. Some people like to call it panel optimization because they don't like the idea of dieting or budgeting, which is another way of making choices so you get your needs met. But basically the common 100 amp electric panel that was in homes built up into the 70s can deliver 24 kilowatts of power, and that's a lot of power. Most homes only need about 5 to 10 kilowatts of power. Some of the bigger homes might be using 15 kilowatts. A lot of this all fits in the regular 100 amp panel, but people oversize them. The little graph on the left shows the annual peak amount of panel usage is about less than half of the capacity of panels for a number of homes we've been looking at. In fact, we found 99% of homes we've looked at can get by with a 100 amp panel. So why do this watt diet? It's basically to save you time and money and also help everyone else electrify by leaving space on the neighborhood transformer, that pole top, that thing that looks like a big garbage can in the sky up on the electric pole. those will get overloaded if we put in oversized devices or low efficiency devices. So you can save about $3,000 to $30,000 by staying on your existing panel. The high dollar number savings is if you have underground service to your house. It costs a lot to upsize underground service. And so the advantages of this Watt diet for the owner are the faster, easier projects, not having to apply to PG&E to get permission to upsize the connection, and getting high quality equipment and leaving future flexibility for doing more electrification later and leaving more power both for your own EV charger and for your neighbors. But for the city you're in, it also has the advantages of faster, easier projects and helping them meet their climate targets. And it takes less workforce to do it this way because there's fewer electrician visits per project. And that helps the cities meet their climate goals by getting it done on time. And for the electric utility, there's also advantages because the Watt diet tends to extend the transformer lives. So those things aren't wearing out up on the poles by overheating. They quadruple the amount of heat they produce if you double the amount of power you put through them. So saving power, reducing these peak loads on the transformers really cuts the total cooking of the transformer, which is how they age out. And then that helps the utility meet their goals. I use a lot of 100 amp panel examples. You may already have a 200 amp panel, and then it's super big. There's a lot of space for you. You wouldn't have to be careful for your own needs, but if you are careful in Watt diet, that leaves a lot more capacity for the rest of society. So I use the expression electrify simply, so others may simply electrify. Just to show you, we're all in this together, and there's multiple reasons to be doing this approach to efficiency. On the left, I show just a couple examples of if you take an unplanned approach to this versus a planned approach on the right. You can pick appliances with different efficiencies or different power ratings on their nameplates. And so I just show dishwashers, even though I don't focus on those, but using an Energy Star dishwasher, it may have a lower power rating as well as a lower energy consumption. But I tend to focus, instead of the common 30 amp heat pump water heater, that's what this HPWH means, we tend to focus on either the 15 amp version, which just uses resistors that are half as big as its backup resistors, or the new 120 volt versions, which are only 400 watts down here. And then for the space heating heat pump, this COP means coefficient of performance. It's that ratio that Melissa was mentioning, like how many multiples of heat can it move for one unit of energy it uses? And we like those high COPs, like moving 3 times as much heat as it uses in electricity. And so by using those high COP units, they use a lot less wattage. And then not using something they use in the Midwest and Northeast, sometimes they'll use electric resistor strips in the air handler to do backup heating when it gets below negative 17 Fahrenheit. we don't need that out here in the Bay Area. So don't let the salesman sell you that kind of nonsense. Just get a good inverter driven heat pump and it'll go down to negative 17 Fahrenheit and still be delivering heat. And then also that one of the places we're really seeing people oversize stuff, it comes as residual range anxiety. People put in 50 amp circuits for their EV chargers that are enough at 8 hours a day to give them 140,000 miles of charging, and they might be driving 1/10 of that amount. And so, why occupy so many circuits and amps with that when you could use a 20 amp level 2 charger? And that would give you 39,000 miles per year. You could still use the big stout wire on it, so it's future-proof if you want to reset the little, they call them dip switches inside later to go up to 30 amps or 40 or 50 amp circuit flow. So anyway, just doing these things you see in the little red numbers on the left, it would have occupied 98 amps on the panel, and on the right, 40 amps. So these basic steps to this watt diet are just assessing what you have already. So looking at what is the size of your electric panel and that main breaker it has, and then thinking about your future needs for power. And then make a plan, kind of write it down, make a plan for what are the equipment types you're going to buy and how efficient, if you choose those appliances to stay within an amp limit. And sometimes you might want to choose controls. Sometimes controls that pause the EV charger really help you finish off the job and get a powerful EV charger that just turns off when the whole power load on the house got up, once a year during the big cookie baking winter party with the doors open and the heat pumps blaring and everyone showering and making cookies all at the same time in both ovens. That's when it would pause the car charger for 15 minutes until you were done with some of the burners on top of the stove. So anyway, controls are optional, and then you'd look at installing the circuits so you're ready for the burnouts of devices, or if you're brave, you could try to wait for burnout and see how it goes. And then also insulate your house if needed at any time. It does not have to be before the projects. And so, summarizing a bit, put in high efficiency, right-sized appliances, and it's okay to put in big stout wires that are thicker than the appliance needs. That does not present a safety problem. It gives future users a chance to upsize if they want to, without having to replace the thin wire with a stouter wire. And so you look at the appliance rating, this little appliance is an appliance on a diet, and then you look at its little nameplate rating, it helps tell how big the breaker has to be. And you can put, a 30 amp breaker on a wire that can handle 50 amps. That's fine. And then later change to other things if another owner wants to upsize. The ways we reduce these peak wattage flows, you can weather seal your house and insulate and add ventilation heat recovery. There's lots of good things you can do to your envelope that save energy. And then what I focus a lot on is picking the efficient equipment, the high performance heat pumps and inverter driven heat pumps, which have a computer and a variable speed control, and they just keep resetting the operating power of the inverter to be just right for the conditions. That saves a lot of energy and power and makes it quiet too. So that makes you a really good neighbor. Then eliminate that need for resistor strips. That's easy. Just don't get sold that stuff. And then avoid oversizing the equipment. This takes a little more courage because contractors like to oversize things. They make more markup, and plus they feel safer leaving you with more of a rocket in your garage that can never generates a complaint because it leaps into action. But with a heat pump, you tend to want to try to size it smaller and let it run longer hours or longer minutes at just sipping power. That's the right strategy with heat pumps. You can pick multi-function equipment like a range, meaning it's got a cooktop and an oven built into one slide-in appliance. I like my combination washer dryer. It's a single machine. I put dirty, dry clothes into. I get clean, dry clothes out of that machine. I don't have to visit it midway through and see if my clothes are moldy yet. And so there's also upcoming will be two-way EV charging in the future, and then heat pumps that do both heating and cooling. It's another, like Melissa mentioned, it's a multi-function device. You don't need a separate furnace and air conditioner. The heat pump does both jobs and comes out cheaper, especially after all the incentives and now tax credits for it. It's way cheaper to be putting in a heat pump than putting in a gas furnace and an air conditioner. And then, like I said, you can use external controls like circuit sharers, circuit pausers, automatic load management systems, etc. Those are kind of like little traffic lights that avoid panel jams for you. Then this is my favorite chart. It is showing these 5 end uses. Here's clothes drying at the top, and then this scale across the bottom is the number of counted panel watts, up to 12,000 watts, so 12 kilowatts, and down to 0 at this end. And so for the electric code, looking at these 5 different ways to dry clothes, what is the counted panel watts, and the common electric resistance dryers here. And then you can get heat pump dryers that are a lot more efficient, and that my combined washer dryer doesn't even count as another load because it's on the washer circuit. Then for cooking, there's a few here. And then I didn't show it yet, but there's this new battery operated range that would be just about 1,000 watts. So it'd be down here. As another way to be cooking. And then for water heating, the new 120 volt heat pump water heaters, I mentioned they're only a couple hundred watts. And then here's the big 30 amp common heat pump water heaters. Their power when they're in resistance mode is out here at about 4,500, but the way the code counts these things is at different coincidence factors. They call them demand factors. And so these are all scaled by the appropriate coincidence factors. And then here's heat pumps for space heating. And I just show, here's a low efficiency one, HSPF 8.5. It takes more panel power to do the same amount of conditioning. And then here's one of those resistor strips on it that I say you should avoid. And then here's, just 5 different levels or 6 of car charger circuits, and going up to, 270 miles a day at 8 hours a day charging. That's ridiculous charging speeds, unless maybe if you're an Uber driver with only an 8-hour break. But anyway, there are lots of different sizing options to go through. And so now, policy-wise, what would it be like for California without a watt diet? Homes will try to electrify with the common oversized equipment, 30 amp water heaters, 50 amp EV chargers, heat pumps, big old resistor dryers, et cetera. And the electricians will be in short supply. They're too busy doing all that panel upsizing and adding circuits and things. The distribution staff from the utility will be swamped. They won't be able to respond. It'll be months and months like it is doing all that upsizing. And then they'll be upsizing the transformers and adding that into the fixed cost and raising rates. And so that's not going to be good. There'll be no happy customers and lots of finger pointing. So with the watt diet, and I change it to green, with the watt diet, we'll get more people picking these right-sized things, like the right-sized EV circuits and the right-sized heat pumps with the good inverter drives, instead of federal minimum standard stuff that EPCA, that performance legislation that was the basis of that court challenge. It's, instead of using that kind of minimum standard crap, it used good stuff. And so then there'll be more electricians available because they won't be busy doing busy work. They'll be available to be installing the cooking circuits that may be needed, and the occasional upsize that is needed. Some 60 amp homes may need to go up to 100 amps to get a big giant Western American lifestyle. The PG&E staff will be more able to handle things and keep up with logistics, and they won't be having to handle worn out transformers as often. So happy customers, lower rates, shared progress on climate. And so the ball is getting rolling. Senator Josh Becker did pass SB 68, which has the Energy Commission look at how to working on ways to help normalize this. And then concierge and their haze. And a contest where Department of Energy moved products and processes. So that contest has just started, and new products are coming to market to make this easier. And so this is kind of what electric service panels look like. And I just like to show this. These are 2 different circuit legs inside an electric panel, and you're the other if they're 120 volt. And if they're 240 volts, they reach both of those legs. And that's how they get 240 volts and 120 out of the same thing. This is my annual energy usage of different devices, and power counted in kilowatts on the panel for this code sizing. And you can see some of the diagonal stuff is when you can save energy and capacity with the same move. So going from a low efficiency heat pump to a high efficiency heat pump lets you move down in annual energy consumption and down the vertical scale in panel amps saturated. Here for the EV charging, if you were going, say, 15,000 miles a year, it's all the same energy, no matter what size circuit you're using, but the bigger circuit just saturates the panel more and kind of overheats your battery faster, that kind of stuff. And then here's a resistance water heater versus the heat pump water heaters. I got 3 different efficiency levels. Going to the left, more efficient, uses less energy, and 3 different power levels, like the 120 volts down here at the bottom. And there's a couple different dryer options. So for me as an energy nerd, I like that graph. This is just another 2-column comparison again, getting all the electrification in plus all the other circuits in that, expanding that earlier example I showed you with a 15 amp water heater on that side, a 30 amp on this side. And basically we can do all this stuff, give you 39,000 miles a year of charging and 97 amps on the panel versus needing an upsize on this side. So that's just example. There's some silver bullets. This graph just helps me show in heat pump water heaters, the great strategy is don't use the small tank. Go to a bigger tank, 65 gallons or 80 gallons, it'll deliver more hot water. That's what the vertical axis is. And the 3 different lines are the 3 different power levels you can be using. And so you get your biggest bang out of going to the bigger tanks. And then this is the amount of extra heat setting you put on it if you use a mixing valve. So using a big tank and a mixing valve can give you lots more hot water than simply increasing the power on a small tank. A small tank would do. All right. So anyway, we'll be handing out the slideshow. I'll send it to Gladwyn so he can share it with you guys. But we've got different silver bullet approaches. You know, the things we found that really work is going to that lower amperage water heater in a bigger size, using these inverter-driven heat pumps, and they only take, say, a 20 amp circuit. They have a 17 amp draw on a 3-ton unit, and they're nice and quiet. They're the quietest ones out there. And then also using, there's a brand called Empora of an EV charger. EVSE is EV service equipment. And so it's got an adjustable power level too, and it pauses itself if the panel gets too high. So we made these electrification plans in a study I helped with on 10 homes in San Mateo County, and we would just show them, you know, here you switch from this gas water heater to this 15 amp heat pump water heater. And in her case, we used an 80 gallon one because she had a bigger family, and we got rid of their air conditioner and furnace and had them do a combined device. It's a smaller outdoor unit with this air handler replacing her furnace in there. She wanted to keep the big giant cooktop, and they do also make an induction version of big giant ranges. So we found one of those. And then for the clothes drying, in her case, she wanted a separate dryer. So it's a 14 amp hybrid heat pump dryer. It's got both a heat pump and a resistance element in it. And it's a very big dryer, 7 cubic feet. And then for EV charging, that still fit on there. And then these are some of the control examples people could use. And then in her house, we ended up needing to recommend more insulation in the attic over here and more insulation on the ductwork. And we produced these contractor bid packets and then looked at, you know, what is the cost of doing all that, and made these little panel diagrams for people. And then this is that graph again showing here are all these homes and how much their peak electric use is in the highest 15 minutes of the year. So in all 8,760 hours, that's the highest load they ever got to. And then here's Josie's and my fully electric homes. Each of our homes are fully electric. And we still have all this panel space left because, you know, basically people don't use that much of their panel, but everyone worries about it. All right, so policy priorities. You know, just the sobering fact here, I just want to share with you is that the existing fleet, worldwide fleet of fossil-fired machines will emit enough carbon dioxide equivalent to drive us to 2 degrees Celsius rise. So we don't want to go over 1.5, and we for sure don't want to go over 2. And the existing fleet of stuff, if we run it for the rest of its normal life, would drive us all the way to 2. And so that tells us every replacement fossil machine, somebody's gas water heater burns out, they put in another one because they wanted to do it the same day, and that's all the contractor had on the truck. The emissions from that gas water heater, well, I had to do it. It's entirely over the 2 degrees Celsius rise, all of it, because the first one was in this other part that was getting us to 2 degrees. The second one is entirely over the top. So that gives us policy analysis ideas. Well, to hold 2 degrees Celsius rise, you would need an immediate pivot to 100% electric upon replacement, the policy starting now. And just to put it in perspective, currently heat pump water heaters are going in 2% of replacement cases in the Bay Area. So we need to go from 2% to 100%, and we need to do it now. And so voluntary measures have gotten us up to 2%, and they might be able to double and get us to 4%, but it's hard for them to get us to 100. So policy-wise, we need to get to 100% as soon as possible, like, say 20% by 2025 and 100% by 2027, when that Bay Area air quality zero NOx rule would do that. So we need that NOx rule to survive a review in 2025. So we need the market to be responding and getting in shape so it looks like it can be able to do that replacement in 2025. And then there's other Bay Area rules that phase out through 2031. And so something we all can do here is start thinking of what can we be doing to help get the market ready and the transitions that survive the review in 2025. So as Melissa mentioned, we want to keep REACH codes in place. They smooth the path, or they've helped starting to change what contractors understand about electrification, and that filters into the existing building market. And then we need to smooth the path for same-day water heater replacement, because the water heater rule is the one that comes up first, and it gets reviewed in 2025 to see if we're ready. So we need to encourage building departments, our local building departments, to do like Menlo Park and waive the fees for electrification permits. And then
Please
encourage
wrap up, Tom.
Do I have a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, and so I am about done. And so we need to encourage instant online electric water heater permits. In the San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, we see four agencies already doing that, and about 35 are not doing it yet. They're taking anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks to issue water heater permits. And so in Menlo Park, where I live, we're encouraging climate leaders to work on an electric equipment replacement rule in 2023 to expand our REACH code. And we are working on permit streamlining and streamlining our zoning process. And so that's it for me, and I'll return it back.
Thank you. Our next speaker before we go to a 5-minute break is Rob Bernhardt, who will be speaking about passive and Paris-aligned buildings. Rob, please share your screen.
Thank you very much, Gladwyn. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see such a group of folks that are interested in what really is a vital topic. Let's go back to the start of the presentation, shall we? Good, here we are. Now, has everyone got the presentation up there on their screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, so I've been asked to provide a bit of background on why we need to do the things that Tom and Melissa were talking about, and some of the science and so on, and the data that's behind the imperative for these measures and how it applies to buildings. So buildings are something that we can't ignore. They're responsible, according to the IEA, for 37% of global emissions. And it tends to be higher in urban areas, the majority in most cities, and lower in rural areas. And comes from a variety of different sources that are outlined in this pie chart. You can see of the buildings relating to emissions, the vast majority are from building operations. The 6 and 3% at the bottom are what they call embodied carbon or embodied emissions. Gladwyn can speak about that later. But even those two items, when you add them up 9%, that's not much less than half of transportation. So it's a big number, and it's big enough that it's a number by itself that we can't avoid. The other thing is that if we do the sorts of things that Tom and Melissa were talking about, and we maximize efficiency, then the embodied emission, the embodied carbon, becomes by far the largest single emission factor. So we reduce all the operating emissions to as close to zero as possible, and then we're left with embodied emissions, which are still huge. So the other thing to keep in mind when you're reading various statistics is the typical greenhouse gas emissions inventory reports submitted by nations and other jurisdictions around the world reflect Scope 1 emissions. And this pie chart includes Scope 1 to 3 emissions. Scope 1 is a very restricted definition that in the case of buildings would include just the emissions that happen on site. So and primarily that's the emissions from burning fossil fuels on site, from the actual burning of it. It does not include the emissions generated by generating the electricity that gets transported to site. It does not include the emissions in the transportation for getting everything there, for the materials that go into the building. So there's a lot that's missed, or at least it's not missed, but it's allocated to other sectors in the scope run report that you'll see. And the true number is more up in the range of 37% of emissions. So it's a big deal. And excuse me, we need to be careful of it. The good news is that we have a global consensus of what we need to do, and also we've all agreed to do it. So this consensus has been achieved via the UN and its agencies. We have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's mandated to assess and report the science of climate change. The reports they generate approximately every 5 years are consensus reports from hundreds of thousands of the leading scientists in the world. And they're very sort of, I'd say, moderate because they are consensus documents, reports of what we know we need to do to address climate change. The world, through essentially the world, agreed to do what was required in the report by adopting the Paris Accord in 2015. And then also in 2015, every member nation of the UN agreed to pursue the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has identified. So the US and virtually every other nation in the world has made a legally binding commitment in relation to the Paris Accord and has agreed to pursue these Sustainable Development Goals. So we've got this really remarkable circumstance where we know what is to be done and we've agreed to do it. There's a paper that I don't know if it's been circulated, but it's certainly available that I recently authored, and it reviews all of these findings in some detail and provides the authority and so on for it. And but the bottom line shows up on the right-hand side of the screen there. There's what I call 8 easy points, because they are easy for those that are in the business and understand these kinds of buildings. Today, we're going to focus on step 1, advanced climate mitigation by. And so it's efficiency, renewable energy, embodied carbon, and then doing those 3 things as rapidly as possible. But the other items are often thought of as relating more to the Sustainable Development Agenda of the UN, and many of them are delivered by achieving effective mitigation measures. And we'll get into that more as we move along. But that paper, if anyone is looking for the authorities and the references and so on, you'll find it in that paper, and we're happy to share that. Now, the challenge we face, although we got this good news I just outlined, is that although we know what is to be done and we've all agreed to do it, essentially no nation is doing it. So the greenwash tends to prevail. We see widespread use of terms that they sound good, they sound nice, but they actually don't mean anything. They're not adequately defined. So net zero, we see buildings claiming to be zero carbon when in fact there is no such thing as a zero carbon building. There's no such thing as a zero carbon energy source. All energy, has some carbon impact. Different energy sources have vastly lower impact than others. Fossil fuels being orders of magnitude different than solar and wind and so on. But there is no such thing as zero impact. And the public, I would say, gets distracted by appealing but broadly ineffective approaches. And it's those appealing but ineffective approaches that often gain the highest level of political traction. So it's also fairly clear, and it's reflected in a variety of reports, including well-done UN reports, that and IPCC reports and so on, that we have the skills and knowledge today to do what is needed. Innovation is an amazing thing. It will allow us to do it faster, better, cheaper, and we should by all means be pursuing innovation. But we can actually do this stuff today. And the sort of thing that steps that Tom was pointing out, none of it requires new technology. We can actually start right now. What is required is a change in conventional practices, whether it's how you size an electrical panel, how you spec equipment, how you design buildings. You just need to change our status quo practices. And the challenge we face is systemic inertia, not a lack of technology. The most effective way to overcome inertia is by pursuing measures that achieve multiple beneficial outcomes simultaneously. So it isn't just efficiency for the sake of efficiency and reducing energy costs. It's because efficiency measures will also deliver healthier, more comfortable, more affordable buildings. And same with using renewable energy. It's cleaner, it's healthier, it can be more resilient, especially when you've got a distributed grid. So there's a whole multiplicity of benefits that should be packaged along with the carbon abatement or the other specific policy goals. Try to identify the whole range of benefits and package them together. So if we look at that first bullet point I put up earlier, and listing there was 4 sub-elements under it. I call them the 4 fundamentals of effective mitigation in relation to building. The first one is energy efficiency, and that's put first because right now it's responsible for the lion's share of emissions. And secondly, it's the first one that most jurisdictions attack. They want to improve building energy efficiency. And that is done for a number of reasons. Number one, no energy, as I mentioned, is zero impact, zero carbon. But the other thing is that it is cheaper and more sustainable to reduce than to generate. And again, I'd fall back on some of the comments that Tom made. He's talking about ways to do things simpler and reduce things. That 100 amp panel is a lot less money than 200 amp panel. Thirdly, we know that through efficiency, we deliver multiple benefits. Many of the resilience and health and comfort benefits are achieved that way. And finally, and perhaps counterintuitively, efficiency improves affordability. And those that are arguing more forcefully in favor of the status quo tend to assume that a building that is more efficient is therefore more expensive. And that's simply inconsistent with the data. That the highly efficient buildings achieving the highest levels of efficiency that are broadly distributed around the world or broadly implemented around the world is done at essentially the cost of conventional construction. There might be a small increment in the capital cost of the building, but it's small, and the operating costs are vastly lowered. And that's critical because operating costs represent the vast majority of life cycle costs of the building. It's not the capital cost. And there's different stats you'll see around. One fairly common one is about 20/80. So the capital cost of a building is about 20% of its operating cost. And we focus so much on trying to save 1% off the capital cost, knowing that that's going to increase the operating costs by 10 or 20%. And it's an irrational way of bringing to accounting your economics. So, but we see it all the time. So anyhow, efficiency is critical for those reasons, and it's been prioritized in policy circles for those reasons. The other thing is that the International Energy Agency, when they're mapping out a path, and they've now got a path for net zero for the economy worldwide by 2050, they see efficiency as contributing more to emissions reductions than renewables do. And here's a graph that they have generated illustrating that point, that efficiency gains can result in 40% reduction in emissions, renewables in 36%, and then they've got 2% for fuel switching below there. I'm not quite sure what they mean there and what the difference between that and renewables is. But at any rate, it's clear that efficiency and renewables are needed for us to achieve our goals. And these numbers, again, like any other statistic, they can vary somewhat. The story remains broadly the same. Oh, here we go. Good. The level of efficiency that's been identified globally as needed to achieve Paris commitments is what is broadly and sort of generally referred to as the passive house level of efficiency. And at the base level, that's the level I was talking about we know we can do today for little or no incremental cost. And today's leaders in the industry are achieving more than that basic passive house level of performance, including in California. And it suggests I say a few words about what passive house is, because the name is actually an unfortunate translation from a German term, because it's neither passive nor is it a house. It's a energy efficiency standard relating to buildings. And the basics of it are really very simple. There's 5 basic principles. The first one is it's got to be adequately insulated. The amount of insulation will vary with the climate, if you're designing the building to achieve specific performance outcomes. And so cold climate building will have more insulation. Same thing with windows. You need appropriate windows for the climate, and they're designed to fit exactly for that use. I believe in California, double pane windows are adequate in some of the climates, and triple pane would be required in others. Certainly in Canada, where I'm calling from, we need triple pane windows everywhere. Then there's an adequate ventilation strategy, so the building is supplied with a constant supply of filtered, clean, fresh air, silently supplied to every room, 24/7. The fourth element is air tightness. So you can't control the interior environment of a building when the wind is blowing through it or the heat is leaking out through the walls, through drafts and so on. And finally, it has to be what we call thermal bridge free. And a thermal bridge is simply a point in the building where heat can flow through the outer envelope. And think of apartment buildings with balconies, those slab edges that just go right out to form the floor of the balcony. We call them, in a cold climate like Canada, we call them cooling fins. They're heating fins in a hot climate. They just allow the outdoor temperature to go inside and create all kinds of problems. And those sort of thermal bridges are very, very common in conventional buildings, not just balconies. A passive house can be any kind of building. These are all passive house buildings. There's a historic retrofit, lower left, an apartment building, lower right, apartment building, upper left, a library in just outside of Vancouver, actually, in the middle, and then a high-rise mixed-use, primarily residential tower going up in Vancouver. So they can be any kind of building, retrofit or new build, and that's really what they are. Simply a performance outcome that has certain health and comfort and hygiene criteria built into it. All right, so if we move from energy efficiency to the second fundamental, which is using renewable energy, we've heard conversation on that already, and that begins by, first of all, decarbonizing the grid, because we want to electrify, and that requires a decarbonized grid. but also to plan for distributed generation with buildings as prosumers. That is, they both produce and consume. And if we have efficient buildings with distributed storage, that is batteries and so on, it really enables load shifting within the grid. You therefore plan for a smart, efficient building integrated with a smart grid. We've got a great recipe for the future. We've had other people comment on that. So I won't say more about that. But when you've got an efficient building, the electrification that Tom was talking about, it becomes really simple and becomes the cheapest option as well. And you can downsize a good part of the equipment that is needed. It's a smaller heat pump. It's fewer refrigerants. It's all of these things that just makes the electrification so much easier. The third element is embodied carbon, and Gladwyn is going to speak about that. I've made a couple of comments about it already, but the points I would make that from a global policy perspective, the reductions in embodied carbon must be far more ambitious than most people currently believe is feasible. Just like most people on the street, if you ask them about the level of energy efficiency, they wouldn't think it's possible or feasible to do past those levels, but it is. And we can get there with embodied carbon too. There are synergies with other goals. For example, transportation. If we build less parking infrastructure, whether underground or surface, we reduce embodied carbon. So those kind of synergies could be captured with it wherever possible. And also the clear recommendations from IPCC and other sources are that we need to avoid simplistic solutions. Some materials currently are lower carbon than others. For example, wood is often put forward as a low carbon material, and some it certainly is. But we also need our forests. So wood needs to be sustainably harvested, and we need to be careful with just saying build this wood or other simplistic solutions. The hierarchy in terms of reducing embodied carbon is sufficiency first. That is, we don't build what we don't need. And we don't need huge, especially in North America, our residential accommodation tends to be largely an HQ for many people, not for everyone. So that's sufficiency. And if we can reuse an existing building, we can't always, but where we can, we should do that. So don't build what you don't need. And then be efficient with your use of materials and how you design the building. So use fewer materials. And lastly, choose materials with low embodied carbon. So that's sort of three-layered approach that going to be needed to get where we're going. Now, the fourth fundamental is to do the first three as rapidly as possible. And that's really important with buildings due to their long life cycle. Whatever you put in a building is there for a long time. And if it's a high emission, high embodied carbon, if for embodied carbon, it's there for the life of the building. Well, it's there, period, even after the building is taken down. But the other cycle, the other elements of the building, it's in there for decades at least. And half measures, doing, half the efficiency or, putting in there's all kinds, I won't get into the details, all kinds of half measures that are out there that are very appealing because they're easier for people to do. You can do them without changing much, but often they impede success because they prevent the sort of measures that are needed. They stand in the way. You've done half a job that's done, and you should have done the full job. It's so much easier to put in the proper window in the first place rather than one that's half the job. So it doesn't mean that we need to change everything massively and at once, but it does mean that we need a clear understanding of where we need to go and to ensure that any steps we do take are on a path to that destination and not in fact down the other now. Retrofits are an excellent example of that. To go in and do a shallow retrofit, something that is less than the passive house level of retrofit efficiency. And that building is that those emissions and everything around that building is locked in for decades. And it's really important that the building have a plan so we can get to the level it needs to be. It might be step by step, but it shouldn't just be a shallow retrofit and call it a day. So, so the challenge is really critical. The science is that all new buildings globally need to be at the level I've been talking about by 2030. Developed nations obviously should be ahead of that. And developed nations need to retrofit half of their existing buildings by 2030. I mean, deep lift. So that's a huge lift, and it's one that most jurisdictions aren't pursuing adequately. So just in, before, so we've got to go back one. The second last slide here is to just make the point that these four fundamentals are all independent. We can't trade off efficiency for renewables, for example. We need both. We can't trade off embodied carbon for efficiency. You know, some people are really keen on embodied carbon, and that's great. But then they will argue why it's more important than efficiency. It actually doesn't matter which is more important. We need to do both. And that's really the key thing, is we focus on each of these, and we focus with equal figure on all of them to get us where we need to go. And just a final slide then, turning to the other elements, the other 7 steps for having what I call Paris-aligned buildings, that will get us on the path and achieve UN Sustainable Development Goals. If we take a quick look down that list of the remaining 7 items, we've talked a little about sufficiency, efficiency, and renewables. So if we do those first things, we can cover that fairly well. Top mentioned grid interactive, that these buildings should be that, and really having smart buildings, smart grid. It's a big change, but it's something we know how to do. Maintaining comfortable, healthy indoor environment. That's what efficient buildings do during extreme weather. Maybe they don't stand up to hurricanes better, but that's a structural engineering issue. But energy supply interruptions and so on, they certainly help with all of that. And efficient buildings, if we look at point number 5, can very easily be resilient to the future climate, because they're designed around a careful energy model, and all you need to do is put in a climate file for 2050 or 2080 or whatever date you want to design for, and see how that building will be in 2050 or 2080. Do you need a bigger heat pump? What is it you need? No saving device. And you can design the building so that you don't have to put the bigger heat pump in, but just make sure that there's space for it when it's needed. So that sort of resilience is quite easy too. Things like flooding and sea level issues, that's more of a land use issue rather than a building issue, but that's fine. And then we get into mitigating the impacts of weather events. People, obviously, they do that. Infrastructure, nature, and point number 7, supporting biodiversity. That's more in the landscape design around the building and broadly on public spaces too. So we know how to do landscaping. It's not that hard. And managing stormwater and biodiversity, having the appropriate forest canopy around that sort of thing. We can do a far more than we are doing with buildings, and it's not that big an ask. And if we do that, point number 8 makes the point that there are 17 sustainable development goals, and buildings will contribute to achieving all of them, with the exception of number 14, which addresses life below water. So that's kind of the high-level overview, and why we do some of the things we do, and why we're actually failing to do some of the things we do. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Tom. We will now take a 5-minute break and come back to go over location efficiency, and then do a Q&A, and finally a summary. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending our Building Electrification and Decarbonization session of the Environmental Stewardship Program. Our next topic is going to be on location efficiency. What is location efficiency? Location efficiency is how we used to do cities 100 years ago. They were walkable, and this was before we had the age of trucks and automobiles, and everything was centered within a focus that was walkable. And what it solves for is what Tom called our Western consumption, embodied carbon, and it achieves the Sustainable Development Goals. This slide was presented at COP26, and it shows that our richest 10% produce most of the emissions. 52% of our cumulative emissions are produced by only about 10% of the population. 50% of the population produce almost no emissions, 7%. And so what we are trying to solve for is this problem here where our richest few are consuming most of the carbon budget for the rest of the planet. We in North America are 4% of the world's population and 25% of its emissions. And we use this carbon budget in where we live, our houses, how we move our cars, and food. And we'll take up food in a later session of Environmental Stewardship Program. Cars, and especially our low density building pattern here in North America, results in most of the embodied carbon within a structure. And it's because we have to float the house on a concrete pad and put in these circulation elements so that the cars can circulate down there. We end up with most of the embodied carbon from the concrete that we are putting into buildings. If we build bigger buildings, we just average the concrete over more of the houses. What we really want is this building here in Toronto, which because of the wetlands was not able to put in parking. And so it ends up at only 7% of the embodied carbon. Now, the reason we drive and need to embody all that carbon in our parking is because our destinations have sprawled beyond walkable distances like we did only 100 years ago. And these automobiles that we have also muscled up. According to the EPA, we are selling more large SUVs and trucks now than sedans. And this commute then locks in a lot of the social ills that we try to fix with the Sustainable Development Goals, such as congestion, air pollution, environmental justice impacts, crashes, declining earnings from asthma, the rising cost of housing, homelessness, diabetes, heart disease, and resource depredation. Note that during the pandemic, this commute went away and our cities ended up making more money. So it's possible to change this paradigm. Now, the World Economic Forum says that there are currently 1.4 billion cars in the world today, and that this number is supposed to double by 2040. So if you take 3 billion cars, which is 3 times 10 to the 9, and the cost of each one, which is $50,000 or 5 times 10 to the 4, you end up with 1.5 times 10 to the 14, which is what, $1,500 trillion. Now, by way of perspective, if you look at the budget of the G7 nations, which is the US, Germany, France, and a few other countries, England, Canada, Japan, the total budget of the G7 nations is $10 trillion a day. there isn't enough money in the world to come up with $1,500 trillion to keep us below 1.5 degrees by 2030. It's just not going to happen. And if you take the subsidies that we give automobiles, it's about 7,000 from the federal government, 2,500 from California, something from PG&E. You end up with only 20% of the cost is in the subsidy. So if you take 20% of $1,500 trillion, you still need to come up with $300 trillion, which is 30 years of the budget of the entire G7. So as MIT says, it's going to take 300 years to electrify transportation, which means that it's not going to be Paris aligned for 300 years. As Rob said, this is a long-term problem that we are just not addressing today. It results in pollution that just cannot be filtered, that causes all kinds of problems from asthma to cancer, results in disease-adjusted life years of low-income communities near big roads, that is 10. People that live in low-income communities along big roads live 10 years less than people that live elsewhere. So as Tom said, we aren't right-sized, and so we end up oversized, and this oversize results in more gas usage, more oil usage, more concrete usage. And these emissions are increasing, and in order to get them, we end up drilling for more oil. This chart in the New York Times only looked at oil and not fracking or gas. This is just oil. And this is all the new millions of oil equivalents that's predicted to come online in the next 30 years. And if you look down this list, you'll see these are all allies of the US. The only two that are not aligned with the US are Russia and Iran. And so all this additional fossil fuels results in more human rights violations on indigenous lands. This Willows project, for example, is on lands that the Inupiat, the Gwich'in, and the Nuiqsut are considered home, where their livelihoods depend on fishing and other returns that come from the land, and those are all get displaced. So we end up creating the poverty that then the Sustainable Development Goals are supposed to fix. Now, we saw last time that the Keeling curve is increasing. It's increasing at a faster rate. It was increasing at 1 ppm every 15 years, and it's currently increasing at 2 ppm every 15 years. And as we saw from the pandemic, we need to figure out how to flatten the Keeling curve in order to reduce the emissions that we are putting into the atmosphere that are then causing the climate to change. So we saw from Rob that sufficiency, efficiency, and renewables plus the Sustainable Development Goals can lead to decarbonization, which is essential to achieving carbon goals and can be achieved with walkable cities like we did 100 years ago. So that's efficient location efficiency with service densities linked on a walkable footprint. So here's one measure of location efficiency. This is the postal service in Nuremberg, Germany. And you can see here that because of the battery, that the land uses here are generally walkable, but also slightly sprawled out. This postman thought it was really funny that a tourist would want to get a photograph. And this is Bedford, England, where you can deliver the mail without any batteries or gasoline power. So this is one way to look at location efficiency. When I was in downtown San Jose the other day, I saw a postman walking around with his postcard on a pull cart. Thank you. We will now take Q&A. So Joe Hood asks, are there any campaign policies designed to speed retrofits? What action should we urge city governments to take? Tom, can you take that question?
So, sorry, Gladwyn, what was that one?
Now, are there any campaign policies designed to speed retrofits?
You know, I think that's what we need to be working on. So I put a couple of notes in the chat. We need to be thinking of what are the things to ask for that will help, first off, get to same-day replacement of burning out gas water heaters with heat pump water heaters. And I think the technology that'll probably go in most of the time will be the 120 volt plug in the wall, just regular plug in a shared outlet heat pump water heater that has just a 450 watt compressor. It can be run on an extension cord, but it has a 9-foot cord. So I'm running into some things in some cities where they're trying to add value, as we humans all do. We try to add value by adding more steps into a process and coming up with prerequisites for each other. And that just slows everything down. But we have to get, you know, these are North Americans we're dealing with. They want hot water that next day. They cannot go a day without it. That would be uncivilized for all we know. And so we have to figure out, okay, how do we get them over those humps? And so we need to be working on our local building departments to help them understand the need for streamlining. And some of the things I put in there is having that comparison campaign to compare the building permit fees and timeline to get a heat pump water heater installed, and compare it for all cities like Sierra Club did for solar permitting years ago. And that comparison that Sierra Club did and shared among the cities in the press helped all the city leaders see, oh, we have to catch up with the low permit fees of the leading agencies. And so having them compete to see how do they streamline and catch up will probably be the way to go. So I'm depending on Sierra Club to put together some data and share it with the local electeds about where all these cities stand in timeliness. And I have some of the data for you, and cost of getting water heaters in.
The second part of that question was, what should city governments do? Rob, can you take that? You're on mute, Rob.
Sorry about that. On mute is the way a lot of people like me, and more broadly on the question of retrofits, to get the buildings where they need to be. If we look at the way we do retrofits now, you know, the envelope retrofits, it's slow, it's complicated, it's expensive, and it isn't that realistic. So there's programs around that are designed to change all of that. We change how we deliver retrofit practices, then we can make it faster, we can make it cheaper. And the Energy Strong program that originated in the Netherlands is considered a leader. They've reduced their project costs by over 50%. They've already cut more than in half. And the occupants remain in the building. It takes a week to do the entire multi-unit building, and the occupant maybe leaves for a day when they replace the windows. NYSERDA has looked at that, the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency, and they calculated that for social housing in New York State, if they could reduce the cost of retrofitting by 40%, then they could bring it up to the Paris-aligned level at the same cost that these housing agencies are currently incurring for their building renewal programs. So that's the key thing, is you don't retrofit a building just to retrofit a building. You retrofit it at the stage in its life cycle when the cladding needs to be replaced or the windows need to be replaced in any event, and then you do it properly. So we need this innovation in how the projects are delivered, and then that sort of approach to bring the cost down. And to me, that's what's going to be needed. So you sort of industrialize the process rather than ad hoc, bespoke solutions that are so expensive and time consuming.
Thanks. John?
Yeah, first of all, thanks to all the organizers of this program and to the presenters. Great information. I had a question, it might be for Melissa because it was in her slide deck, but I'd love to hear thoughts, suggestions, ideas, policies, programs for addressing the issue of displacement and increased rents and sort of the whole split incentive dilemma when it comes to landlords and tenants, whether it's multifamily or commercial office buildings. Any thoughts or suggestions or case studies or examples of solving that issue?
Melissa?
Yeah, I could start, but Tom and Rob, feel free to fill in afterwards. I feel like I don't have a good answer for that right now. After the Bay Area Air Quality Management District vote, a part of that was also implementing a implementation working group to discuss and figure out kind of what the solutions to this are. I think that's a great question that many of us don't have the answer to. But fortunately, I want to say that there is a lot of money from the Inflation Reduction Act that will go towards lower income communities, which is an affordable housing. And I think that's one way that we will be able to address that. It's just like figuring out how to pull money into the right places. Yeah, so I don't feel like I have the best answer for you right now. Tom, Rob, did you want to add some more into that?
Thanks, Melissa. And John, you probably attended the first session where Craig Lewis talked about the building in Berkeley, which kind of meets all of the boxes that Rob Bernhardt had put out. So that the Berkeley building is a low-income housing project that's multi-story, that's going to be designed as a microgrid and is intended to meet all the needs of the residents. And it's being built right on the transit corridor with no parking in order to reduce the embodied carbon in the building. And we are going to be presenting that building to David Canepa, the supervisor for San Mateo County, shortly. Rob, did you have something more to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think John has hit on a critical issue, and certainly the housing agencies that we've worked with over the years, they just can't relocate their residents. So that's why the Energy Strong program, the NYSERDA program, they all are built around residents remaining in place. They may need to vacate for the day while the windows in their unit are done, but that's it. And they do the entire building. The Energy Strong program, they're targeting 1 week work on the building with the residents in place. And that again requires the innovation I talked about, but it's something that we can do. And in NYSERDA, I know is working out their program, and you see these sorts of programs being developed in different areas, but we're on the learning curve there. We don't have all the answers, and we certainly don't have everything in place everywhere.
Yeah, and there's one more aspect to this, which Tom talked about, the Western lifestyle. The reason why a lot of low-income residents end up with problems is because they are located in disaster zones. So for example, here in Belmont, the Belmont Trailer Park has flooded every year since it was built 40 years ago. And this year it ended up flooding twice because of the atmospheric rivers. Each time the residents are moved into hotels for the period, and when the houses, when the water goes down and it's safe to return, they go back. And another area that's had multiple flooding has been Moon Ridge in Half Moon Bay. It's flooded 4 times. The area now has black mold and has to be treated for black mold after each flooding. So it's a massive problem, and it has to be solved in the housing element, where we take these disaster zones out and more efficiently locate where low-income people are placed in the first place. Ronnie Fisher.
Hi, thank you all. I am a board member of a condo complex in Sunnyvale, 200 units. It's older. Everything is electric, but the appliances are very old and inefficient. I can't remember, is the new law 2035 where they don't sell gas heaters? And
It's a rule.
2029 for gas furnaces.
I need advice on how to prevent the idea of planning for a new hot before yours breaks down, and where to look for products for these units that are 800 to 1,000 square feet.
So I put in the chat a couple of links to free resources. The retrofit guide is probably a good one to look at in our section on water heating there. And then I'd be happy to talk with you more about it as well. I think some of the 120 volt products have just come onto the market since we published the guide the first time. I forget if they're in the updates.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And our CCA
Yes.
also offer advice in this category.
I'm sorry, the CCA.
Yeah, for example, Peninsula Clean Energy. In your case, it would be Silicon Valley Clean
Yeah.
Energy.
What
Right.
about Bay Ranch? Should I ask them to do a presentation?
They would. I wouldn't. I would start with the CCA first.
Okay, so that would be Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
The
you.
BayREN and the other groups tend to complicate the issue a lot, and it raises more questions.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Do we have any more questions, or can we move now to the summary portion? I see John. John, go ahead.
Yeah, since we have a little extra time, Gladwyn, on your presentation on walkable cities, I love the idea, and I wish more cities were like that, but that seems to be a long range sort of effort. I guess, do you have ideas on ways that we can accelerate things within cities to achieve more walkability?
Yeah, I think
we will be discussing that soon. You know, Gladwyn, sorry, go ahead.
we have another ESP session coming up just on walkable cities.
Yeah.
Okay,
We will
great.
be talking about this whole concept of 15 minutes. So retrofitting the existing land use pattern with 15-minute neighborhoods, and that's that's kind of another what do you call it, flashpoint for Republicans. They're against Agenda 21 and 15-minute neighborhoods. And the reason is that's the way neighborhoods used to be built 100 years ago. If you look at Menlo Park and where it was when the city was formed around the Caltrain station, which is on El Camino, the neighborhood was walkable, and 15 minutes was the way people got in. 15 minutes is what you walk in a mile, and you're able to do most of your service needs within that perimeter. So it's something we already know. As Rob said, we already know how to do it. It's a question now of doing it.
Great. Well, one other quick question. You talked about the increase in cars in the world, and there's sort of this idea that at some point transportation will become more of a service. So we need fewer cars, and is that something that we'll talk about in another session?
Yeah, we will. And that's also in chapter 10 of the UN's IPCC report, where they say 66% of the emissions from transportation can be reduced by just going to sharing. And car share, for example, in Austin, where BMW and Mercedes have electric car share fleets that are geofenced to stay within the city, are an efficient way of delivering the kind of services that people want, which is getting from one place to another when they need it, rather than forcing everybody to own a car and park it and then embody the carbon in to house the car.
Yeah, you combine that with public transportation improvements and walkability and bikeability, it makes a big difference.
Yes, thanks. Okay, we will now go to the summary portion, and I will put up.
Yeah, I can do it. I have it open. So let me.
You do, okay.
Yeah, let me just So I'm going to, oops, share screen. Okay. So I want to warn people, I'm a very simple-minded person. I used to teach college, and my, assumption is always to start, at the very beginning, to assume that people know very little. So in contrast to the other speakers, this will be very simplistic. And if I'm oversimplifying something, please correct me, okay? So, oops. Okay, so decarbonization, electrification of buildings. Buildings account for about 27%, as I think Rob also indicated, of operational emissions. Well, the electrification movement is going very well in California in comparison to the rest of the country. And it's been primarily targeted towards space and water heaters and stoves, although stoves are much more problematic. Okay. So electrification of new buildings is easier because you don't have as much pushback, right, from people. So electrification of existing buildings is where, cities have encountered more resistance, especially around the issue of stoves. A lot of people don't like electric stoves. And I don't think it's very reasonable, a bias, because I just switched to an induction stove and it's just perfect. I like it so much better than my gas stove. So cities have tried to seek exemptions, mostly around the stoves, issue. So what are some of the problems? Well, there have been pushback by interest groups such as fossil fuel companies, restaurant groups. The Berkeley ruling was a recent legal setback. But as Melissa said, it's, there are ways around it, even if it holds, right? It's being appealed now. So people shouldn't get very pessimistic over this. Also, there's been consumer pushback and also the politicization, right, of the whole issue. Right wingers are saying, oh, they're coming for your stoves next, right? So the outlook is still that there's much work to be done. So even if appeal of the Berkeley ruling goes against us, do not despair. Okay. Gee, I think I have the wrong one up, which is very strange. Let me
You're okay. You can go to the next slide.
No, I think I have the okay, let me take a look. Okay, so I have something about Tom's presentation too, but Tom's, I think, was very clear. And the Watt diet, just remember Tom, Kabat's Watt diet, that when you're thinking about electrifying your home, your appliances, contact Tom. Just remember that there's a right way of doing it. Okay, so okay, so decarbonization, energy efficiency is a very important component of decarbonization. A lot of people have more or less forgotten about it. But just remember that decarbonization through electrification alone is insufficient. Sure, it will lower the operational greenhouse gas emissions, significantly, but only if our grid switches rapidly to, our renewables. So in this transition period, energy efficiency or minimizing energy usage is absolutely critical. Without energy efficiency, overall energy consumption will remain high or even increase, triggering increased fossil fuel production, usage, and emissions from power plants. Therefore, energy efficiency must be coupled with electrification. And most important of all, grid decarbonization must occur rapidly. Okay, now, energy efficiency. Okay, it's important even when our grid is powered primarily by renewables. Why? Because unless we're energy efficient, we cannot really see land and ecosystems. being conserved the way they should be. And also conserving resources in general going forward is very important. And keeping energy costs low and stable is also very important. So let's take a look at the passive Paris-aligned house. So it uses 90% less energy because of the high level of insulation and air tightness. It has superior indoor comfort due to consistent temperatures and good air quality, and the affordability too. I've heard that it uses modules in its construction. And then embodied carbons, which is an issue that is increasingly coming to the forefront. It represents around 11% of emissions. So this combined with the operational emissions, I think Rob said about 38%. So energy efficiency must include decarbonizing the embodied carbon in the manufacturing of buildings. So there are 4 key elements of decarbonized energy efficiency. One is, efficiency. The passive Paris Accords aligned homes is a starting point. It's just a starting point. It uses only 10% of energy, but it's an important starting point. Okay. Number 2 is renewable energy. Clean energy grid based on distributed generation is very important. So I think those of you who were here last time, you heard a lot about how community microgrids are done. So this is a very important direction to move towards. We don't want to continue our centralized remote generation system. And number 3, no or low embodied carbon. The sufficiency principle, this is kind of defined by these principles. The sufficiency principle, don't build more than you need. B, use more sustainable, resilient materials, for example, wood over concrete, and use sustainably harvested wood. And, finally, we must pursue all at the same time. Electrification, as I mentioned before, will increase electricity demand substantially. And to prevent ramped up fossil fuel generated electricity, we must focus on energy efficiency and we must transition to renewable energy quickly. And we must push for decentralized energy systems. And then finally, decarbonization, transportation is about 22 to 25% of emissions in the US. So the grand goals of EV may not be achievable soon. Why? Well, I just read a report and they said that they've been polling a lot of Americans about why they're, what problems they have with switching to EVs. Now, most of them said that they don't have any plans of buying EVs anytime soon because of the cost of EVs. Even with the $7,500 in the IRA, I mean, that is not sufficient enough for a lot of middle-class people to think about purchasing EVs. And they also said there's a shortage of charging stations. Yeah, that's true. And the time for charging is also a vexing problem. So these are all barriers to mass purchasing of EVs. Now, there are also, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, very negative environmental and social impacts from EVs. Well, first of all, there's a huge demand for rare metals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, and the mining and production of these is just absolutely disastrous. It will result in biodiversity and ecosystem loss, environmental degradation, decreased freshwater supply, increase indigenous land grabs and indigenous exploitation, which will result in increased social inequality and misery. Now, the negative health impacts, a lot of people think, oh, there's no tailpipe emissions from EVs, so everything's fine. No, but there are still particulate matter emissions from brake dust, tire dust, and fine particulate matters. And all of these is associated with pulmonary and cardiovascular problems. So we shouldn't be so naive about seeing that as a savior of our planet. So we really need reduced dependence on cars. We need to focus on walkable cities, car share, mass transit, and biking. So what does that say? We have to start shifting our values. We have to start valuing community and social interaction over excessive material consumptions. So it's the sufficiency principle. So actions, while local governments need to streamline and facilitate electrification in buildings, as well as building codes to incorporate energy efficient Paris-aligned passive homes. And they need to plan walkable cities and do it in ways that are cost-effective and equitable. And all levels of government need to streamline and facilitate distributed clean energy installations. And we, advocates need to work with local governments to educate people about the importance of all of the above. And okay, some upcoming events. Our next project meeting is this coming Thursday at 4 p.m. And we will also be reaching out to project participants about joining city teams. Okay. Our next outing is an easy one. I know some people complained about the San Bruno Mountain one and said it was too strenuous. So this next outing is a walk in downtown San Mateo. So I hope a lot of you will join this. We're going to meet at 9:30 and it's probably going to take a couple of hours and then we'll go to lunch. Okay. Now, the final reminder is June 3rd, which Gladwyn already reminded people about. It's going to be a webinar on funding from the IRA, the Infrastructure Act, and also green banks. Green banks will play an increasingly important role in funding, green projects at the local level. So please contact us to give feedback and to share your ideas. That's it. I hope that was clear.
Oh, May 26th is a Friday. Is it a Thursday or Friday on your side?
Oh, wait a
It says
minute.
Thursday.
Let me.
I'm a little confused.
Yeah, let me check.
June 3rd is the,
Yeah, let me check. Okay, I will straighten out the date soon. I will send people notification.
all right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you especially to Melissa, Tom, and Rob for helping us put on this session of the Environmental Stewardship Program where we talked about buildings. And we look forward to working with some of you on your projects related to buildings in the next couple of weeks.
Now, Gladwyn, just let me ask people, how many are interested in going on the San Mateo downtown hike? Please raise your hand if you think you are. Okay. Okay, so hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Right. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thank
Bye.
you.
Happy electrifying.
Thank you, everyone.
Right. Mm.